Okay, so now we come to the questions and answers piece, and we're always very lucky with this because people can take it for granted that we have our panel just asking questions and answers, but it's very generous of people to open themselves up to unseen questions, so we'll always thank them deeply before we start and apologise afterwards. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've got some more people have come to our panel from Marino. So Leah would have mentioned that there was 5 people on the research team. So we like to welcome Maya, Emma and Cleena as well to the panel. And I'm going to start with the Marino team to give Sean an opportunity to catch his breath. So the first question, there's lots of questions in here, by the way, just to say. Did your study find anything out about the use of iPads or interactive online games for learning at home?
It did to some extent, yes. So some of the schools use, actually the school one, which is the dashband one, they have given all students in the school a free app, mathematics or something, I think it's called, to encourage mathematics learning at home. And that was something that went down really, really well. So that app was something that went really well in terms of children suddenly thinking that mathematics was really fun, whereas that was something they generally struggled with in the school. A lot of the children have very particular needs in terms of learning, and giving that free app to families was very positive. However, on the other hand, that particular school, the parents did also think, or not so much the parents, but there was a big issue with too much screen time or too much screen use. So it's a bit of it's a hard balance to get. Some schools, the parents really regulate their children's access to iPads in the home, and in that sense then I suppose you could use them in the school, but there is that fine balance between if they have too much of it at home that's inappropriate, then do they really want to bring it into schools as well? But for that particular school, it really helped with mathematics learning. We didn't really look at the use of iPads within the school setting. We didn't really seek parents or children's perspectives on the use of technology within the actual classroom. It was more in terms of access to screens in the home and use of screens in the home. However, the parents were really in favor of that particular app that they got for learning mathematics. So I suppose we can't say too much about it from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. Sean, a controversial one to kick you off, I'm afraid. Why does the Department of Education invest so many resources in teaching Irish in schools when it's not a useful language for the majority of students outside of school? Don't kill the messenger.
Irish is a fundamental part of our curriculum, and that's been decided, I think, by government. And I'd also go back to some recent public surveys that were undertaken actually about the importance of Irish in society, and I think there certainly is support for a strong majority of people in Ireland to Irish on the curriculum. I recognise the point and the frustration about, I think, the relevance of Irish and how and the effectiveness of how it's taught, and we've been putting a lot of work into the curriculum in Irish, and we talked about the languages curriculum earlier on, and the link in language learning between how languages are learned, and we're trying to build in Irish and English in a combined way in the language learning techniques within primary school, and in a broader way with other languages in post-primary, and also linking in with such a brilliantly huge diversity of language that we have in our population now. But it is something that we have discussed with the Minister since he's come in, and I think the Minister himself would say he's an example of somebody who personally wasn't that interested in Irish as a youngster, but showed as he got interested now in Irish how interested, he went back and he learned it, and he's got very, very interested, and he's somebody that that demonstrates personally the positivity that there can be for Irish and the positivity that there is as a whole. That's not to say that there shouldn't always be an opportunity for discussion about every aspect of the curriculum. I think it's really important part of a democracy that we debate issues around all aspects of the curriculum, and that's very interesting and very valuable, and we should keep that. And there are so many aspects of the curriculum that are continuously being debated, and we all need to be open to that. But I think the current policy is clear, and I think that use outside then is an issue then that I think we need to get better at as a society. We need to provide more opportunities for people. For example, in my workplace, we have a Circle Cora, and it happened to me yesterday, and I happened to go down for the cup of coffee and have the Circle Cora. And there are examples like that can be, I suppose, multiplied across the board, and there are some really good examples of engagement in communities in Irish, which can prove, I think, that it can be useful. But I recognise that it's not a topic on which everybody has the same view.
Okay, thank you. So the Merino team, whoever's going to take it, assuming that the majority of parents work full time, how could parents have time to help their children doing their homework? The little time they have together in a weekday should be recreational and not homework the kids dislike so much. We should follow Finland example, no homework, please.
I think I want to answer, I'll start maybe with the idea of the working parents, because it was something that was interesting that came through in our research around working parents particularly and their engagement in school. And a lot of working parents spoke about they would find it helpful maybe if schools opened earlier, or about that constant battle about how to go and create spaces because they were finishing work much later, and the childcare issues and all that goes with that. And I think maybe it's helpful, and something that came through in the research very clearly is how we think about parents' involvement or engagement, including homework and all the other activities that go on in that. How do we think about that? And particularly maybe when we're talking about parents who are working, both parents who are parents like myself, who are single parents who are working full time, how do you mediate that? So I think within that, I think that would be the starting point in terms of what can schools do in general to maybe support parents in the diversity of parents, and particularly parents maybe who don't have the time richness to be able to go into schools. Now I think what I'll do is I'll pass that on then to members of the team who are working specifically maybe around the question to do with homework. But I think the starting point has to be to think about how we think about all parents and how their involvement is in the school and what the school can do, such as things around like earlier hours of opening for schools. That came through very clearly from working parents, things about what they can do in after school things, maybe in situating homework within that kind of space, and that was something that came through quite clearly from a lot of parents, but particularly working parents, by having an after schools area within that school thing, and that homework and things like that could be situated within that. That's of course if you continue with homework, which is what I'll pass on maybe to somebody else on the team. That's not on.
Well, I suppose as the research showed, not everybody's in favour of getting rid of homework. A lot of people are, but what we do have now is we have international literature and we have Irish literature, and one of the recommendations from the study is that we need to talk more about homework. So, and another recommendation is that it becomes part of, a module on working with parents, also in colleges of education. So I think there is some hope that arising from those conversations, a kind of a collaborative approach to, how homework might be managed for children in schools will come about. That's the hope anyway. But it is very, very difficult because there is not, one view on whether there should be or there shouldn't be homework.
And so just maybe in terms of Finland, just to throw out the idea, we hear a lot about where in countries where they've scrapped homework, but then what I think a broader conversation needs to be looked at is that what are the children doing when they finish school, and say in Finland, they're much more outdoors, they do, you know, music, then less screen time, less in front of the television. And we tied in growing up in Ireland data within our study to try and link it in. And growing up in Ireland data is, it's been alluded to by other members of the team, showing that some children, many children, are spending a lot of time in front of television, maybe not outside, not running around, and that when you look at, say, countries like Finland, where, you know, homework has been reconceptualized and scrapped, but what they are doing, what are those children doing outside of that? And I think when we start having conversations, say, around Finland, I think that would be really useful conversation to start about, but what are those children doing, so that we don't just go, okay, no homework, and that's grand if that's where we go. But the last thing I think anybody here wants, though, is maybe children continuing on in front of the television, because growing up in Ireland is coming across very clearly, it's reported in the findings, that this is not something that is necessarily aligned with positive outcomes across a kind of a wide range of different areas.
Thank you. And just to say, both Sean and Joan have mentioned the module on working with parents. So just so people don't think that's an aspirational wish, the National Parents Council have developed a module, well, 2 modules. One's an 8-week one and one's a 22-week one. It's currently operating in 2 colleges of education in Ireland at the moment, and it's been running for 3 years. Now, it's only reaching a small number of students at the moment. It's an elective, but we're working with both of those colleges in how to develop it. And there's also an advisory group of many of the stakeholders involved in that, in how we can develop it further, but also look at the continuous professional development of teachers who are already working. So there is work happening in that area, and I think the fact that the researchers also indicated that that's an important piece will help that work develop. So just say that. Sean, then, can you find another way to assess resource needs of primary schools other than using standardised test scores?
I think the issue really is what mechanism do we use to fund schools as a whole, and we use a combination of measures. We obviously have an overall allocation based on just the numbers, and then there are other allocations. Obviously, there can be a JESH allocation, and then on the special education needs, we have worked through the model that we have at the moment, having undertaken in the NCSE, the National Council for Special Education, undertook a lot of research to talk to people engaged, and obviously the NPC Primary was very involved in that, and tried to look at a number of measures, including test scores, to look into that. And I think what we know is that the allocation of special education teachers and the identification of children with special education needs was slightly more biased towards the middle classes under the old sort of looking at every child system. And we wanted to get a better system than that in place, and we think that this is the system that we've got in place, which has to be obviously subject to continuous review and so on, and we've obviously changed the model. We have had the first allocation, and then we left that for a few years, and now we've done a second allocation on a slightly different basis. And I think that that's the allocation bit, but I think part of the allocation bit also is linked to the way in which the allocations now aren't depending precisely on each child being identified with a diagnosis, and we have kind of broken that as the primary link. It doesn't mean that there isn't some level of diagnosis, but I think there was an our system was overly reliant on diagnosis, which meant that children had to get identified as needing something, whereas now we have a more empowered system in place that the resource can go to a school as a whole, and they can make the calls within what they know about how children can get the supports that they need, and that's what we do for the teaching resource. Parallel with that, then, on the SNAs, we have done sort of similar work which followed on the teacher allocation work, which is effectively coming up with a very similar set of ideas. The difference, I think, with the SNA work is it's also linking in with the health sector supports that we have. And so we're now seeking to pilot a new way of the special education needs assistant and other associated supports in starting in this September to look at a new way of doing that as well. I think the overall approach is everybody having an individual assessment giving rise to an allocation doesn't really work. Some way of giving a fair and appropriate allocation to schools to empower them to address the needs of students who may come in and out of needing those extra needs appears to be the best way to do things, and we need to keep looking at that system, assessing and evaluating it and seeing how we can change it. But the system that we had, I don't think was actually meeting the needs of the students in the best way possible. That's not to say that everything around special education needs isn't always a contested space, but we have reached the stage now where nearly 20% of the education budget, nearly 2 billion, is going on special education needs supports. That's the commitment of Irish society to supporting families with special education needs, with children with special education needs, is absolutely huge and has increased significantly through the downturn and since the downturn.
Thank you. Unfortunately, it's lunchtime, so we're going to have to cut the question. It's probably unfortunate for you, but you're all pretty relieved, probably. What I normally do, particularly with ministers and secretary-generals, is give them the copies of all the other questions to take so that they have an idea of the issues that are coming, and I'll also give you the rest of your questions because it might help you in terms of your future studies. If there's particular things in here that we might get a response from the department back from, we'll be able to inform you through that on our website.